A word of warning though, these execution methods start gruesome and only get worse from here. And the last one? It might just surprise you. When it came to executing people, the Romans really had a flair for the dramatic. From the classics like crucifixion to military decimation, they knew that heinous crimes needed special punishment. If you've watched The Gladiator or paid attention in Sunday school, you might have heard of the tradition of condemnation to beasts, or by its Swedish power metal band name, Damnatio ad Bestias. In Damnatio ad Bestias, the condemned would be thrown to the wild animals to be eaten alive and…
Actually, Damnatio ad Bestias meant that the condemned were given weapons to fight the animals. When people were just fed to the beasts, they called it Obituary Besties.
Huh. Cool. How did you get in here?
Door was unlocked?
Really? Now, being trampled, gored, eaten, or crushed by leopards, buffaloes, wild boars, and leopards sounds bad enough. But the worst version of this type of execution was reserved for those guilty of parricide. That is the crime of killing either of your parents. And it was called the punishment of the sack, or poena culi. Legend has it that the first person to suffer this death was Lucius Hostius sometime after the Second Punic War. Here's how it went down. First, Lucius was beaten half to death. In later years, if the executioner was feeling spicy, the victim would be whipped. Then, a bag from wolf hide was placed on his head and his feet were stuffed into clogs. When he was good and blind, helpless, and in excruciating agony, then he was stuffed into the sack. That's not so bad, is it? A little cramped, but he'd manage, right? Then the executioner dumped in a dog, then a monkey, followed by a snake, and finally, a rooster. All those animals were stuck inside a cramped, dark sack with next to no air, pressed against Lucius's soft, broken body. They clawed and bit at him and each other in the worst battle royale ever put together. But just to be sure Lucius wouldn't survive that, he was also tossed into the sea.
Okay, on trace. Unes, deux, trace!
Should we push it in, or?
The tide'll handle it. Come on, we're missing the crucifixions.
Needless to say, if Lucius hadn't been dead by that point, he would have certainly drowned. Now, this death was dramatic, but at least it was over quickly. This next one, though, was all spectacle and no remorse. The Romans were drama queens, but to be fair, they learned it from the Greeks. All of the most famous ancient Greek execution methods had a slightly theatrical bend, like being tossed over a cliff or, famously, poisoning people with hemlock. Which killed you slowly enough to let you settle your business before snuffing you out.
Crito.
Yes, teacher.
I owe the sacrifice of a rooster to Asclepios.
I will do it, teacher.
And 3 drachmas to Hipparchus, the grocer. I have no money on me, so you'll have to spot me. I'm good for it.
Mm-hmm.
And Crito,
Yes, teacher.
tell Alcibiades. He's a bitch.
Teacher said,
I heard.
But when it came to dying horrifically and with style, you couldn't beat the Brazen Bull. Created in the Greek colony of Sicily sometime in the 550s BC, the Brazen Bull was pitched to Phalaris, the tyrant of the city of Acragas, by Paralaus, a famous Athenian artist and engineer. The bull worked like this. The entire thing was a hollow sculpture of a bull made of bronze with a door on its side. Under it, there was a large fire pit that would heat up. That sounds horrific enough, but Paralus, being the drama queen that he was, went one step further and included a crude horn in the statue's neck, made to catch the screams of the poor bastard being tortured inside it, piping them through the bull's hot mouth, making it sound like the bellows of a big beast. And lastly, as a bonus, the Brazen Bull was designed for easy cleaning, letting the captors scoop up the ashes and burnt bones of their victim.
You left out the best part.
How did you...
When the bull burned long enough, the bones would burn so completely, they'd shine like jewels. Then the people would set them into bracelets. I think that's beautiful.
Did you climb in through my window?
Yes.
One of the most famous people killed by the Brazen Bull was actually Paralaus himself, who was shoved inside the bull by Feralus in the absolute most metal proof of concept in history. So, imagine you're Paralaus, thrown into the Brazen Bull and the fire has just been lit. Because of the bull's shape, all you can do is... Yeah, that's it, laying there while its belly begins to heat up. And as your flesh begins to sizzle and the air around you becomes so hot it burns your lungs, you reach for purchase on the bull's sides. But by then, the heat has already climbed across the metal, heating it to the point your palms and the soles of your feet develop third-degree burns and peel off at a touch. You try to tumble and escape, but in a matter of minutes, the heat inside the bull has exceeded 300 degrees Celsius, well beyond the burning point of the human body. The bronze burning white hot, your clothes, hair, eyelids, and skin itself combust, like a piece of paper held too close to a flame. And as the heat causes your eyeballs to pop and run down your cheeks, you scream with all the horror of the damned. And out of the bull's mouth, a bellow that can wake the gods themselves. At that point, your suffering is at least over, and your body burns to ash. But some legends have it worse for Paralaus. According to some versions of the story, Phalaris himself pulled him out of the Brazen Bull and allowed his burnt, suffering body to live the rest of his, I assume, hours on Earth in terrible agony before he finally died. Is the Brazen Bull dramatic and terrifying? Sure, but at least you died fast. Faster than the next method of execution anyway, which was supposed to last for weeks. If the Greeks were the masters of the dramatic, the Persians were all about function. No frills, no pomp, just getting shit done. And this went from empire building to their history. I mean, look at how each side describes the Battle of Thermopylae. The Battle of Thermopylae demonstrated the Greeks' ambition of glory, the love of their country. All the virtues were carried to their highest elevation, and the minds of men exalted to a degree hitherto unknown. And now for the Persian version. All right, they didn't even bother. And with that in mind, there's no better example of Persian gruesomeness and efficiency than the punishment of the boats, otherwise known as Scaphism. Now, we don't know much about the history of Scaphism.
Except we do. Plutarch first described it in his biography of Artaxerxes II, but the practice was probably older than that.
Excuse me, what the fuck?
Went through the vents. You guys have rats.
Get out of my...
Of course, historians think Plutarch's account came from Ctesias, another historian, and his book Persica. But Ctesias was also known for making up a lot of crazy stuff, like the monopods, a race of people with one leg and feet so large they used them to shade themselves from the sun, or his interpretation of Assyrian history, which was completely different from any written accounts we found written anywhere. The guy was probably...
Escapism had three things going for it. It was terrifying, long, and cheap. And here's how Mithridates, a soldier who killed the Persian king Cyrus the Younger, died from it. Now first he was placed inside a boat, so his head, hands, and feet were hanging out. Then another boat was placed on it and nailed into its place. That made a snug little cocoon of pain. When Mithridates was good and secure, he would be force-fed milk and honey until he was stuffed. What was left would get smeared all over his face, hands, and legs. Then the little torture boat would be pushed into the river and left to float. You know, the river, with its reeds and grasses and mud full of flies and mosquitoes and every creepy crawler ever, lured in by the smell of milk and honey slathered all over poor Mithridates. So the bugs would rush in and crawl and sting and bite to get every bit of the sweet honey over them until it was covered. Some would crawl into his mouth and nostrils and his ears, nest in his hair where they could lay their awful little larvae. And Mithridates, hey, would try his best, but remember, he can't reach his face or get away. So he would suffer being stung until finally he was exhausted while being baked by the sun. And when sleep took over him, all that milk and honey in him would make its way through that digestive tract. Of course, he'd try to hold it, but eventually he'd just soil himself. That would draw even more flies and carrion insects until every inch of him was covered in the creatures, inside and out of the boat. And of course, all those insects bring with them, you guessed it, rats and lizards and every kind of vermin that eats them. In a matter of days, Mithridates would be covered in even more creatures, enjoying that all-you-can-eat buffet on him, nibbling his flesh in the process. Some would even make their way into the boats where he would helplessly suffer as sharp teeth tore him up, strip by strip by strip. It would be a slow death, killed off by the sun and dehydration and slow choking and nibbling. Mithridates, the account says, lasted for 17 days before he mercifully died. And if he hadn't, well, then the Persian executioners would have just smeared some more honey on him, just to be sure. Say what you will, that guy was a tough bastard. Just like our next case, who suffered history's most famous slow method of gruesome execution and didn't make a sound. The Greeks were dramatic, the Persians were functional, and the Chinese didn't fuck around. Their most famously cruel method of execution was known as Ling Chi, or as you might know it from all those animes you've been watching, Sentu Bandan, Death of 1,000 Cats. Ling Chi goes so far back it's almost relegated to myth. According to legend, it already existed before the first emperors of China, and it was the favorite method of execution used by Qin Shi, the second emperor of the Qin dynasty, used on corrupt officials. It was used on and off until the 10th century AD when Qin Ji Tang, emperor of the Jing dynasty, abolished it. But it came back into fashion later on. This method of execution was considered so gruesome that a scholar named Lu Yu even submitted a memorandum begging the imperial court to abandon it, saying,
Where'd I put that note?
When the muscles of the flesh are already taken away, the breath of life is not yet cut off. Liver and heart are still connected. Seeing and hearing still exists. It affects the harmony of nature. It is injurious to a benevolent government and does not befit a generation of wise men.
wow, that's pretty good.
Thanks, I've been practicing. Also, your back door's unlocked.
Unlike any other execution methods we've talked about, Ling Chi had no standard procedure and varied wildly through the centuries and places. Now, the process involved a slow, elaborate death that took days or weeks by inflicting increasingly so much pain that the victim was either killed out of mercy or succumbed. One of the most famous people that died from it was called Shi Dicai, known as the Wing King of the Taiping Rebellion. The story of the rebellion is too long to fit in this video, but here's the gist of it.
Well, everybody, I gave it my best, but I just can't pass the government exam. Guess I'll just go insane and die. But first, let me read this pamphlet about the Christianity my cousin gave me. That was a cure. Now, back to dying. Oh, yes, Father. I will make a kingdom in your name.
Shi Dicai, who'd been trapped due to a river flood with his army, was subjected to Ling Chi. When he made no sound, they ran their blades across his chest, cutting off his nipples. Following that, they traced the razor-thin blades in the skin between his fingers, then toes. When Shi Dicai made no sound, his other ear was taken, while the executioner ran his blade across Shi Dicai's nether regions, cutting his sack. It wasn't removed. Then, strips of flesh were taken from the inside of his thighs and buttocks. One of his eyes was cut with a long slice across the face and left to run down his cheek. The executioners continued, removing his lips, then his tongue, then his fingers and toes, in slow succession, before cutting his belly open and letting his entrails spill into the floor. After days of slow, torturous slicing, Shi Decay finally died. During this entire process, his captors said the man didn't utter a single sound. Following this, 2,000 of his captured men were executed and 4,000 were released. Hardcore, right? And you could say Shi Decay earned his death. Unlike this next extremely gruesome death, done to someone who definitely didn't deserve to go out this way. This execution method is mistakenly believed to be a method of execution, when in fact it's just a step of a process that involves death by dismemberment. Now, death by dismemberment is nothing new, and almost every civilization on Earth had had their spin on it. From the Indian tradition of dismembering people via elephant, to the holy Roman tradition of cutting a condemned man's limbs off with a saw, to the absolute most anime Persian execution method of shikeh, where the condemned man would be hung upside down, then cut in half with a sword. That wasn't so bad. The term drawing and quartering came from the English in the 13th century, and originally, it involved simply dragging the condemned man by a horse across this unpaved, cobble-covered dirt road all the way up to the gallows, where they would then be hanged, and then have their intestines cut out, burned, and finally beheaded. That was the drawing part. And then they would have their body tied to 4 horses that would pull their limbs apart. And that was the quartering. See? Drawing and quartering. Isn't history fun? Oh, that practice was extremely famous. So much so, it made its way to England's illustrious and despised neighbor, the French. In typical French fashion, of course, the French zuzzed the execution up, adding extra steps all the way up to the 18th century, where drawing and quartering assumed its final, most terrifying form in the execution of a single poor bastard, Robert Francois Damiens. Damiens was, one moment. You can come out now, I can hear you breathing.
Are you sure?
Yes. Now, Damiens was...
a servant of King Louis XV in Versailles in 1757. We don't know what his deal was, but it's most likely he was really pissed off that the king wouldn't give royal sacraments to a Catholic sect. Or maybe he just blurted something out to stop his captors from pulling out his fingernails.
You see, Damiens tried to stab Louis with a penknife of all things, but only got him in the arm, then surrendered. It was later found out that the king wore so many clothes on he was only grazed. But he was such a ninny that he was afraid he was dying, because he saw a little blood. But the Parliament of Paris didn't care and condemned the man to dismemberment for the crime of regicide. Good job, by the way.
Oh gosh, thanks. Want me to continue?
No. So, imagine you're Francois Damiens. You've just been horribly tortured and carried to the gallows, barely being able to stand, when you hear your executioner say the 4 worst words he could possibly say. La journée sera rude. The first thing they do is put the boots on you. No, not regular boots, silly. These boots. An elaborate torture device that used a vice-like system to compress your legs and break your shins to splinters. You're in agony, so you don't notice the executioner preparing his red-hot pincers. He uses those pincers to pull apart parts of your chest muscles, left arm, shoulders, and thighs, but leaves your good arm intact. You know, the arm you stabbed the king with. That one, they douse with burning sulfur, then molten wax. To keep you from bleeding out, they pour burning oil and molten lead directly into your wounds, suturing them and charring your exposed flesh. Now your body's a mess and the torturers are pretty beat, so they hand you over to the executioner, who uses a special little scythe. It's too small to cut off your head, so he uses it to grab your schlong and dongles and cuts them off with a single motion. This is called emasculation, and it's different to castration in that it doesn't leave you with even an inch to pee with. Now, at this point, time is of the essence. The crowd is begging for your blood. You gotta go with a big finish. The executioner slings you over his shoulder and lays you in the middle of the square. 4 horses are brought in, and your arms and legs are tied to them. The riders give the order, "Yeah, yeah," and they pull and pull. Your joints dislocate, your muscles tear. The skin begins to open as you bleed. The horses pull and pull, but they just can't get it. The crowd boos. This is the worst day ever, and we're not just talking about you. Thankfully, the executioner has an idea. He runs down and, knife in hand, cuts the tendons from your hands and feet. Encore une fois. The horsemen give the order. They pull, and finally, your limbs come flying off. There's blood and gore. Little kids fight for your fingers. People are cheering. Horses neigh. You scream and scream at God, who somehow kept you alive. Excited now, the executioner raises your limbless, dickless body in the air, twirls it around, and then slam dunks you into a pyre. Kobe! Finally, mercifully, you burn. And just 40 years later, at the same spot, that same executioner would behead King Louis XVI during the French Revolution, though without as much fanfare. Damien's died an awful death, but at least he entertained a few people, unlike this next attempted regicide whose death was so gruesome, it traumatized an entire nation. There are bad ways to go, and then there's being boiled to death, a method of execution considered so heinous that it was rare even in the Middle Ages. Except in Scotland. Those guys loved boiling people alive. It was crazy. As a method, it was mostly used on conmen, counterfeiters, sex offenders, and heinous murderers, like people that killed their parents or children. Now, the latest reference to someone being boiled to death was in 1856, when Thomas Eubank described how a Brazilian slave was boiled to death for disobeying his master. And that was the last time it happened. Ever.
Didn't the Uzbekistani government allegedly boil suspected terrorists in 2002?
What?
And didn't that ISIS commander in 2010 say they used to boil people alive in engine oil? And didn't that paid hitman say the Mexican cartels boil people who snitch on the cops alive?
Look, if you promise to be quiet, you can stay, okay?
Wow, really? Really?
Sure, buddy. I'll need you for the next one. The most famous case of someone being boiled alive was that of Ishikawa Gomen. Simply put, Gomen was the Japanese version of Robin Hood, an outlaw with a heart of gold who led his merry men to steal from the rich and give to the poor. His exact backstory is unclear. The legend has it that after his family was slain when he was 15, Gomen trained in the legendary arts of Iga Ninjutsu, then finally banged his master's mistress and ran away with his sword.
Or he was a warlord in charge of a band of misfits.
Or that.
Or he was a ninja, but had to flee after he tried to poison Oda Nobunaga.
What'd I say about keeping quiet?
Okay.
We don't know how Gomen exactly got caught. Now, some say he accidentally knocked a bell on a table left next to a sleeping tyrant, Hideyoshi.
Or his presence was revealed by a magic incense burner in Hideyoshi's room.
What we do know is that he and his entire family were sentenced to die by boiling on the banks of the Kamo River in Kyoto. He, his wife, and several of his children were placed inside a great iron pot filled with oil. Then that oil was slowly brought to a boil until it bubbled. But Gomen, ever the noble soul, raised his youngest son above his head, away from the burning oil. Everyone pressed together began to howl in agony as their feet, their legs, and privates were burned, and as the oil bubbled and popped, fed by the blood and skin and fat of the people burning alive, stacked one on top of another inside the pot, the burning vapor rising to singe their faces, noses, eyes. Bubbles of burning liquid splashed on their faces, chests, and arms. One by one, Gomen's family succumbed to the pain and their injuries and sank into the boiling oil. In the end, only two remained, Goemon and his boy, raised in his hands, obviously horrifically traumatized and weeping. The man held him, thanks to his iron will, but soon the agony was way too much and began to fail him. Before his death, Goman, his legs a hell of boils, his skin and muscles sloughing off him, his entire body slowly burning as his guts cooked inside him, called for mercy. And from the crowd, voices. Finally, in an unexpected act of mercy, the boy is taken from Goman's hands. His final act of kindness is done. The thief lets go, descending into the oil, the burning liquid scalding his nose, burning away his eyes and hair and lungs. His death is not quick, but when it does come, it's a release from his torment.
He's forced to drown his
Dude! Goman's death was gruesome, but it was an inspiration. And now this final one just has to be the worst way to die of all. Pop quiz. What is the worst way to die?
Impalement? Being eaten alive. Sucked through a tiny hole. No, wait, skinned alive. Slowly succumbing to a wasting disease that eats you from the inside out?
Close, but not quite. The answer is... alone. It's called the oubliette, and frankly, it's the worst thing on our list. Most people think that it's just a French word for dungeon, but that's not the case. You see, the word for dungeon came from the French word donjon, meaning the castle's keep. But over time, people began to think of them as underground places full of prison cells and torture devices, like prisons. Nerds thought of them like sunken underground complexes, full of treasure and monsters and sometimes dragons. Of course, the existence of actual real-world dungeons is still debated by historians. Some castles had prison cells for political prisoners, but not all of them. Now, what people keep finding in a lot of castles are oubliettes. Oubliette is a French word. It comes from the verb oublier, which means to forget. It was a narrow place with a small opening you were meant to crawl into, which was then locked shut. Its walls were sheer and smooth, so you couldn't climb your way back up. There were no windows, no latrine, no water, no food. Nothing except the darkness. And far away, behind the walls, the sounds of people moving, living, laughing. We don't know the names of people that suffered this kind of death, so we'll use you.
Why me?
Because you're there, and we'll put you in the tiny cramped oubliette they found in Warwick Castle. There would be nothing for you in the darkness, no sense of space or passage of time. Slowly but surely, hunger would take you. You'd thirst, but you'd probably figure out how to live off the moisture on the walls. That would keep you alive for a while longer. You would move inside the cramped dark space with nothing but the smell of your own filth to keep you company. Then the hallucinations would begin. Your brain, desperate for some kind of interaction or any stimulation, would begin to conjure up sounds, visions, strange shapes moving in the darkness, voices calling your name, the touch on your skin from people who aren't there. And as you slowly descended deeper into the madness, clawing at the walls, you scream out for help. But no one could hear you, just muffled noises, less than a ghost. As your body wasted away, your desperate, lonely brain would begin to excrete cortisol, trying to bring down your mounting stress. But the terror of being inside that timeless, lonely, dark need void would be too much. Before too long, your heart and brain would begin to fail. If starvation didn't take you, then your heart would give out, or your brain, and you would slump into the darkness, unseen, forgotten, alone. They wouldn't even get your body. Your remains are left there to rot, your bones a gruesome warning to the next poor bastard left in that place. Do you see it now? The worst way to die? All right. In any case, if you want more horrifying facts like these, make sure to...
Son of